Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, June the 20th, 2024. Happy solstice! So today is the day when the sun reaches its peak declination above the celestial equator. So in the northern hemisphere, it is the longest day. Southern hemisphere, it is the shortest day. And by definition, it is the time when the sun goes into Cancer. It's actually a completely precise time, the solstice. So if you're in London, it's at 10:51 p.m. today. If you're in New York, it's at 4:51 p.m. today. If you're in Los Angeles, it'll be at 1:51 p.m. today. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, okay, the solstice will be tomorrow. If you're in Berlin or Paris, that means the solstice, is still today, it's at 10:51 p.m. It's also at 10:51 p.m. if you are in Pretoria, capital of South Africa, or if you're in Lilongwe, which is the capital of Malawi. Solstice, there's something dark about the solstice. I was looking at Robert Graves a few days ago in his book, The White Goddess, when he describes the solstice. So I'm just going to go over it again. I'm not going to go into the full details about it, but basically at the winter solstice, there is a new king. He is sort of a Hercules-like figure, and he has a deputy, the Tanist. And he reigns for 6 months, and then at the summer solstice, he's torn to shreds in a ritual way, completely disemboweled, his eyes are torn out. It's quite horrendous. And he is replaced by his deputy. And then the deputy rules until the winter solstice. And then in turn, the deputy is likewise torn apart. And so if you've seen that film, The Wicker Man, with Christopher Lee, what was it, 1971? I think Britt Ekland was in it as well, wasn't she? So The Wicker Man was about an island in Scotland or somewhere, which had beautiful weather all the time and the crops worked, but the crops were failing, so they needed a sacrifice. And that gives us the idea of the solstice. It's not just, the king is not ripped to shreds just for the sake of it, it's to make sure that things work well for the community. And so, that is what the solstice is about. So I'm not saying that we should necessarily be too happy about the solstice, because it is quite a dark time, certainly if you take Robert Graves's view of the world. Now, I have already looked at the solstice, so I'm not really going to look in great detail into the solstice, but the thing about this solstice is that it is square Neptune, because Neptune is at around 29 degrees 50 something Pisces, so it's square the sun. So the sun, just before it moves into Cancer, makes this square with Neptune. And I really want to consider the square between the Sun and Neptune and what it means. And I'm going to look at a load of charts which have got Sun square Neptune in them. You can see some of them in the thumbnail. For example, Ireland has Sun square Neptune, if you take the view that Ireland started with the Easter Rising in 1916. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he has Sun square Neptune. So does Barack Obama. And that Oceangate Titanic submarine, that disappeared, imploded at a time when the sun was square Neptune. But before I look at Sun square Neptune, I want to consider the astrology for today, which is Thursday, June the 20th, 2024. And here is the chart. And so what we have here is at noon, New York time, you can see that the sun is at 29:48 Gemini, so just about to move into Cancer. But in New York, the actual movement, the actual moment takes place at 4:51 p.m. So aside from that, we have got the moon in Sagittarius, mid-Sagittarius at 12:41 Sagittarius. So moon is in Sagittarius for all of us, regardless of our time zone. So with the moon in Sagittarius, there are things going on. It's a nice place for the moon to be in, by and large. There's action, there's a spark. We get a sense that, things are happening. Now, this moon is making an opposition to Jupiter. So with the moon opposition Jupiter, there could be some excessive behavior. Just taking things too far, perhaps, and not knowing when to stop. So we do have to consider that as a possibility. And some of us might need to consider when to stop. We might just get overexcited and perhaps do things that we later regret. And that's especially the case if you are in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand. If you're in the Americas, I don't think that moon opposition Jupiter is going to be such a big deal, but still we're going to feel it to an extent because moon is in Sagittarius, Jupiter is in Gemini. And at the same time as this, the sun is square Neptune. We can see this quite clearly. There's the sun at 29 degrees 48 Gemini, Neptune at 29 degrees 54 Pisces. And so with this exact Sun-Neptune square, very, very close to the Aries point, Neptune about to move into Aries, although it doesn't move into Aries, it actually goes stationary retrograde, I think at the end of the month, or is it the beginning of next month, in a few weeks' time. It goes stationary retrograde, I think it's at 29 degrees 56 Pisces. So actually Neptune doesn't move into Aries until next year. But still, it's very close, and it's certainly on the Aries point. And so with Sun square Neptune on the Aries point, it can be about flooding, something to do with maybe water damage, disasters connected with water. On an individual level, we have to be careful with water. It's not a time for taking risks with water. It's probably not a time for boat trips. Okay, I'm sure you can do, I don't know, if you're in England crossing the channel in a ferry, that's pretty safe, I suppose. I remember when the 80s episodes there was the Zeebrugge ferry disaster. I mean, just because you're on a ferry in going across the English Channel or the North Sea doesn't mean you're 100% safe, but I suppose if it's a regular commercial crossing, you should be okay. But if you're, I don't know, you want to row across the Atlantic, probably not the right time to do that. If you want to go swimming across a river, again, not a good time to do it, probably never a good time to do it. But any risks with water really should not be taken. And so we do need to be careful on that score. Now, as far as the heliocentric picture is concerned, yesterday there wasn't a great deal going on, but today there is more action. So let me just show you what is happening. So there is Mercury. Mercury is at 0 degrees 46 Leo at noon in New York, June today. And it is opposition Pluto. So we have a Mercury-Pluto heliocentric opposition. And with that heliocentric opposition, there might be a bit of a mental power struggle. It could be about propaganda. People trying to persuade us to think in a particular way. I mean, it's easy to listen to people. It's easy to be influenced by them. But we have to ask ourselves what is going on, and we should be very careful about taking what we're told at face value. There's just so much manipulation going on with Mercury making an opposition to Pluto, though it may be us doing the manipulating. So if we want to influence people with this Mercury opposition Pluto, I suppose we can. But, is it the right thing to do? I always ask this question, is it the right thing to do? What are we actually trying to achieve? It may just be a power trip. And if we're working for a government department, we have to, have a good moral compass. The people might be lied to, and look around you. Could be a lot of fake news flying around. And notice how Jupiter is also involved with this opposition. So Mercury is making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter is still in trine aspect to Pluto. So with that Mercury sextile Pluto, Mercury opposition Pluto, Mercury sextile Jupiter heliocentrically, people are going to be very effective, and we might get people who are being falsely optimistic or trying to tell us that everything is fine when it's not fine. I'm not really talking about a personal level when I say things are fine, not fine. It's more about a collective thing, The economy is great. Vote for me. Don't vote for the other party. It's that kind of thing. I mean, we've got election campaigns in a lot of countries, and so those electioneering and those involved with the campaign are going to be really enjoying this Mercury opposition Pluto. But we don't have to be part of it. We don't have to fall for other people's lies. Okay, it might not be lies, but maybe I'm just being cynical. But we have to be very careful in terms of how we listen to what other people are saying, and we must assume the worst. We must be suspicious. Okay, so that's the heliocentric picture, and I now want to look at the astrology for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, June the 20th, 2024. Let me just switch to a geocentric picture. Okay, here we go. These are my forecasts for today, for Thursday. Aries, you're feeling better, I think. You have had the moon in Scorpio, and I think with the moon in Scorpio, you might have been feeling a little bit sorry for yourself, over the last couple of days. You just felt that things just weren't happening fast enough, and that you had to worry about things that you don't normally have to worry about, and at the same time it was taking you a long time to get used to Mars being in Taurus. Mars is your ruler. Mars is still in Taurus, but it still is a little bit irritating that things are so slow, things just not happening at the speed you'd like them to happen. But I think you're getting used to it, and maybe you're now seeing some of the advantages of things slowing down. Because with things slowing down, Aries, you can start to appreciate the environment. You can look at the scenery. And as you look at the scenery, you start to see things in perhaps a different way. You notice things that you hadn't noticed before, and you notice connections that you hadn't noticed before. And really, it's that moon in Sagittarius that allows you to make connections. It's not anything that you have to think about. It's just obvious. It just suddenly becomes clear. Yesterday, you didn't understand it. Now, it's obvious. And because you have connections, because these connections can be made, you're able to make the right decisions, and you're helped by the fact that the moon in Sagittarius is making a trine aspect to the North Node. The North Node is in Aries, it is in your sign. So it's actually pretty easy for you not just to make connections, but also to make connections which are relevant to your destiny and to your path. So Aries, I think it's clear what you have to do. There's no doubts and no questions, and at the same time, you don't have to exhaust yourself. After all, the sun is changing sign. It's changing sign from Gemini to Cancer. And okay, there is a certain time zone issue there. I'm not going to bore you with going into all the time zones depending on where you are in the world. This is more of a medium-term changeover, perhaps not really a major issue today, but over the next few days, you are going to notice a change. You are going to be more grounded. With the sun moving into Gemini, with the sun in Gemini, perhaps your mind was moving from one place to another, and there was sort of questions and uncertainties. And now the sun is in Cancer, Aries. I think you're going to be more relaxed and more confident, and I think other people are going to notice a change in you. You're going to be more grounded. And so, in terms of your domestic and family life, I think there's a lot of useful things you can do, and you can put everyone at their ease. So overall, Aries, I would have said things are improving. So cheer up. Moon's in Sagittarius. You know what's going on. You know what you're supposed to be doing, so really there's no need to complain, is there? Taurus. Mars still moving through your sign. It's going to stay in your sign for some time, but just don't forget that, Mars is quite an energetic planet. And with Mars moving through Taurus, there are things that you want to happen. Okay, they might not happen quickly, but if you assert yourself in a continuous way, I think, Taurus, you will eventually get where you want to get to. Okay, you might not see the end result until next month, but I think if you're patient, I'm really confident that you will reach your destination. Though with the moon moving into Sagittarius, it may be a time when you have to do a little bit of thinking, and that might require some solitude. It's nice to have company. It's nice to have people around you, getting, plenty of moral support. But, Taurus, some things have to be done on your own. And if you try to enlist other people's help, you try to get their advice, it's just going to make things confusing. And so it's down to you to delve below the surface and to work out what matters. And some things do matter, they really matter. But other things are just completely irrelevant. So you've really got to distinguish. Maybe it's literally making a distinction between the sacred and the profane. One of the commenters on my channel, on this channel, reminded me of what profane means. It means outside the temple. I hadn't really thought about that. And it's the stuff which doesn't have any religious significance or spiritual significance. It's just a waste of time. Okay, it might be materially important, but it's not really not really crucial to who you are and where you're going to. And then you have to make the difference. You have to make the distinction. What is important to you, I suppose, from a spiritual perspective, as a soul, moving indeed perhaps from one incarnation to another, if you believe in incarnation, but you have to make the distinction, because sometimes Taurians can get overly hung up on material details. They can say stuff which is really blunt and can just kill the buzz, focusing on something stupid. I've seen it. It's bad. It can be bad. So do get it right. Do distinguish between what is sacred, what is within the temple, and between that and what is outside the temple. And in terms of money, I don't think money can really be avoided today, perhaps, because there is an opposition aspect between the moon and Jupiter. And I know that money is certainly profane, but I suppose we all live in this imperfect material world, don't we? And so money can't be entirely avoided. And so some Taurians might find themselves zooming around, worrying about money, worrying about what aspects of money are important and what they should be focusing on and what should they be not focusing on. And they could waste a lot of time. So if you are finding yourself getting annoyed about money, I suppose you have to ask yourself, how much money are you getting annoyed about? Are you getting annoyed about a large amount of money, which really does need to be taken seriously? Or are you annoyed about a trivial sum, which is simply not really worth the effort? I suppose, I don't know, how do you look at it? Let's say you're worried about $15 and the minimum wage is $15. Minimum hourly wages, say it's $15 an hour. You don't want to spend more than an hour worrying about $15, for example, do you? Because that doesn't make sense. That's illogical, assuming you value yourself on the minimum wage. Hopefully you value yourself at higher than the minimum wage, but whatever, it depends on your situation. But don't get caught up on trivial sums of money. Trivial, it's up to you what trivial means, because otherwise you could just waste too much money on something which is really not worth your effort. But still, Taurus, I do think it can be a useful day. I think that you can really start to understand what is important. And once you understand what is important, I think you're going to be able to make good progress. Gemini. It's over. The Gemini season is finished. And in a way that kind of sounds a bit disappointing. You've had a month of the sun in Gemini. There was a time not so long ago when there were loads of planets in Gemini. There was Mercury in Gemini, Venus in Gemini, Sun in Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini. But now all that's left in Gemini is Jupiter. And that's good. You're going to have Jupiter in Gemini for the rest of the year. I don't know, nearly a year. I think it leaves Gemini early June next year. But the sun is moving out of Gemini. And so maybe Gemini, the spotlight is now not going to be on you. And that might sound disappointing, but maybe it's a relief. You can perhaps let other people do the work. Other people maybe can take the risks, can draw attention to themselves, and you can perhaps step back a bit. So maybe with the sun moving into Gemini, with the sun moving out of Gemini into Cancer, it's just a time when you can be yourself and also consider what you need in order to get what you want. So while the sun was in Gemini, you might have developed a clear sense of what you wanted and what you wanted to be, who you wanted to be. And now with the sun going into Cancer, you have to consider what is required in order to get where you want. What resources do you need? How much does it cost? Not just in terms of money, but perhaps in terms of time, for example. So in that sense, Gemini, I think that you're going to be more grounded and more realistic about what actually needs to be done and what you're actually going to need. Now that first impulse is over, and now it's time to consider the reality of the situation. And while this is happening, Gemini, it is going to be important that you do consider the interpersonal dimension, because the moon is moving through Sagittarius. And of course, Sagittarius is your opposite sign, and the moon is making an opposition to Jupiter in Gemini. So what we have is Moon-Jupiter opposition across the main axis of your chart. And I think you might start to realize how much impact other people can have on you if you allow them to have an impact. Now, that's not just about them taking liberties or infringing your boundaries. It's about how you respond to other people. So people can do things and you can ignore them if you want, or you can take them very seriously. You can sort of listen hard to what they're saying. You can get upset by what they're doing. You can be driven crazy. It really is up to you. So how do you respond to what people are doing? And so, is there a right answer? Well, no, there's not a right answer. You have to make the right decision. Now, sometimes people will say something outrageous, trying to get a reaction, and the best thing to do is to ignore them. Other times, people will do nothing. They'll just say nothing. But somehow there's something wrong, perhaps in their body language, or they might let something slip, and the appropriate thing to do might be to go completely ballistic. It does depend on the situation. And I think, Gemini, you are actually more sensitive than usual because Mercury, which is your ruler, is in Cancer. And of course, Cancer is a sensitive sign. It's an emotionally aware sign. And Mercury is still pretty close to Venus, the planet of relationships. And so with this Mercury-Venus conjunction, I think that if you give yourself the space, you can start to really understand what people are actually intending. And then you can make the right decision about how you are going to respond to other people. Are you going to ignore them? Are you going to overreact? Are you going to take them seriously? It really is up to you, and I think you can make the right choices. But I know I've been a little bit negative there. I've sort of talked about other people in a negative sense, about how they could be somehow dangerous or disruptive. But it's not just about the negative. The moon is making a trine to the North Node. And the North Node in astrology is not just about karma. It's about connections. And so with the moon in Sagittarius, which is your opposite sign, making a trine to the North Node in Aries, in a part of your chart which is often connected with friends and associates, with this moon trine the North Node, I think it is actually a great time for making new friends, for perhaps introducing yourself. Maybe in the past you've decided you didn't want to introduce yourself, it was too much effort, you were afraid of what the response would be. But if you actually make an introduction, say, "Hi, this is me, I'm a Gemini. See what happens," just see what happens. You might be quite surprised by the response. Cancer. It's an important day. The Cancer season has started. Okay, it might start tomorrow. It does depend a bit on your time zone. But if you are in the Americas, Europe, Africa, then sometime over the course of the day or the evening, depends where you are, the sun will change sign from Gemini to Cancer. And this is obviously important. You've had a month of the sun being in Gemini. There's been a lot of action in Gemini. And Gemini is the sign just before Cancer. And so with this action in the sign just before Cancer, it might have felt that you just weren't ready. You just weren't ready to fully assert yourself. You felt that you needed to prepare yourself. Maybe you felt that it was just wasn't, the time wasn't right, and you perhaps preferred your own company. But more and more planets are moving into Cancer now. We've had Venus moving into Cancer, we've had Mercury moving into Cancer, and now we've got the sun moving into Cancer. And obviously the sun stays in Cancer for the next month until, I don't know, July off the top of my head, 21st, 22nd, I don't know. Oh, I suppose you should know. I don't know. Let me just tell you. The sun will move into Cancer, and it will stay in Cancer until 8:44 a.m. on the 22nd. That's London time. So 22nd of July. Okay. Maybe very late on the 21st of July if you're in Alaska or Hawaii, or even California, I don't know. But yeah, so you've basically got the sun in Cancer until July the 22nd. And so this is your time of year, and it's a time when you need to take advantage of a situation. This is a time to make an impression. Though today you might still feel that there is some work to be done, but it's still a time of preparation, even though the sun is moving into Cancer. It still feels that there's a bit of work that still has to be done. And I think that's fine, provided you actually have a time limit. You can't just, so I've got to finish it off tomorrow, got to finish it off, day after, got to finish. No. You've got to make the transition and move from preparation to action over the next few days. I think that is really important. Though today, with the moon in Sagittarius making a trine to the North Node, I think that there is some really useful preparation and work you can do. This might be relevant to the whole way in which you're trying to get ahead, perhaps in your career, business, something to do with status. You'll be very organized, and at the same time, you'll have a sort of an intuitive sense of how things should fit together. And I think that people are going to really appreciate that. And so that is probably a really good way to start the Cancer season. Leo. It's a mixed picture, Leo. You have the sun moving into Cancer at a time when the moon is in Sagittarius. Very different signs, Cancer and Sagittarius. Obviously, Cancer is a water sign, focused on one's feelings, Sagittarius is a fire sign, very fiery, intuitive. So very different energies there. So let's start off by talking about the sun moving into Cancer. So the sun is your ruler. And so if we want to know what's happening to Leos, we look at the sun. I mean, obviously we look at other stuff, but we do look at the sun. And with the sun moving into Cancer, you're perhaps not quite your normal self. You're perhaps more sensitive than usual, more emotional than usual. And perhaps you feel that you're somewhat vulnerable. I mean, I don't want to say you are vulnerable. I mean, I think it might make you might feel vulnerable, and you might feel with the sun moving into Cancer that you need to protect yourself. That's good. Absolutely nothing wrong with that view, feeling a sense that you need to protect yourself. And at the same time, you do have to be realistic, because what's happening is that the sun, as it moves into Cancer, it does make a square to Neptune. And I'm going to be talking about the Sun square Neptune quite a lot in this video, later in this video. But with the Sun square Neptune, there is some danger that you get distracted, that you even get it wrong. You might be sure that something is the case and make a mistake. Now, I think what we're talking about, Leo, here is a temporary vulnerability. Because as the sun moves from Gemini to Cancer, you're not quite sure what's going on. Are you in the past? Are you in the future? What state are you in? You're kind of halfway through the door. You're not in one room, you're not in the other room. And during that moment of transition, yes, you are vulnerable, because you're moving perhaps from one set of rules to another set of rules. And that can be a problem. And then you throw in Sun square Neptune, and you might completely misunderstand the rules and make big mistakes. So what you probably should do is avoid taking big initiatives, avoid making big decisions. You don't have all the information. You don't really understand the way things work right now. Instead, just feel, observe. If you want to take action, you can wait. And, with the sun moving into Cancer, over the next couple of days, as it moves away from that square to Neptune, things will start to become easier. You'll have a clearer sense about the way things are going. Now, while this is happening, we have got the moon in Sagittarius, and that is a very different picture. The moon in Sagittarius is perhaps about you, the creator, you making things happen. And that is something you can do, but without having to make big decisions. You can just be spontaneous and creative and make the world exciting, make your little part of the world exciting, but without making big commitments. I think that is so important. And so by doing that, enjoying the moment without committing yourself to the moment, I think that you can have, a fun time. And at the same time, there's no need to live in the past. I think that there is perhaps new information coming your way, the possibility of new horizons, things that you hadn't been aware of, and you're now becoming aware of them. But, just because you're becoming aware of something doesn't mean you should jump to conclusions. This is only the beginning. What can be really bad is starting to be aware of something and then immediately feeling that you have to take an action on behalf as a result of this awareness. And of course, what you'd be doing there is you'd be doing something dramatic as a result of incomplete information, and that could lead to trouble, especially now when we have got Sun square Neptune. So in general, Leo, I think it can be a good day, but just remember, you're in a changeover period and you are vulnerable to making mistakes. So just don't commit yourself, and I think you're going to be okay. Oh, one other thing. Steer clear of water. I mean, it's not a good time for anyone to go on boat trips, to play with plumbing, think you can sort out leaks all by yourself, unless you happen to be a professional plumber. It's not that kind of day. So be careful with water, because with Sun square Neptune, things connected with water could lead to serious problems. Virgo, you probably feel that you don't want to do much, that there is a lot happening, and if you try to do too much, you're going to exhaust yourself. And I think you would be right in that view. If you try to take on too much, I think that you're not going to be very, very effective. And I think that your intuition is telling you to just stay where you are, to understand what's in front of you, and not to take risks. I think, though, that there will be temptations to take risks, or at least to do things that you're not comfortable with. Those temptations will be very clear. It may be one particular person is pushing you to do something, perhaps pushing you to make a decision. And I think, Virgo, that would be a bad idea. You have to be independent-minded. That's terribly important. You've got to think for yourself. And if you're surrounded by other people, if you're being told this and you're being told that, you're never going to get anything done. And if you do try to take any initiatives, you do try to move in any particular direction, you'll probably get nowhere. So be cautious, and I think that things should be fine. At the same time, be aware that the Sun is moving out of Gemini, and that is important, Sun moving out of Gemini. I think I sort of talked about this a bit yesterday, but with the Sun moving out of Gemini, you might be less concerned with the structure of your ambitions, feeling that you have to get things done now, this minute. And perhaps you're going to find it easier to think about things in a sort of a longer term sense, and thinking about, what you're supposed to be doing. And that approach is probably best. And, if you can sort of listen to other people, that might be a good idea. But don't listen to people too hard, because there is a square between Sun and Neptune. Now, this square between Sun and Neptune, we've got the Sun on the absolute point of leaving Gemini, and it's square Neptune. Neptune is in Pisces, your opposite sign. So there is one person who could really mess things up for you, could sap your confidence, and they could give conflicting signals, and you might not know how to respond. And this could make things difficult for you. So there's a mixed message there in terms of other people. I think, with the sun moving into Cancer, yeah, it's a great time for mixing with people, giving your social life a boost. And, that is going to be the case, over the next month. But today, it does seem that with that Sun square Neptune, there is some danger that the wrong person could mess things up for you. So by all means mix with other people, but don't take advice, or at least if you're going to follow someone's advice, do your own research. Confirm that advice for yourself, because advice, even if it's the advice of an expert, may not be properly grounded, may not be properly researched. Now, okay, sometimes you have to listen to experts, but just be a little bit suspicious if you're told something important today. Although, okay, sometimes you're told something important and it really matters. I mean, I don't want to cause you problems because you ignore the valid opinion of an expert, but you have to consider their expertise. Are they really an expert? Are they really qualified? Or are they just saying they're an expert? There is scope for deception here. Remember, from a heliocentric point of view, Mercury, which is your ruler, is opposition Pluto. So with Mercury opposition Pluto, there are some very manipulative people around. Now, it's just for today. Mercury's a fast mover. Mercury's not going to stay opposition Pluto for very long. But some people do sound very convincing. And if you're not careful, you could fall for their lies. Though I suppose it works the other way. Mercury's opposition Pluto might be you, the manipulator. So which side of the fence are you on? Am I going to encourage you to be manipulative? No, I'm not. Is it always a bad thing to be manipulative? No. It depends. And I suppose it's a time when you have to consider, I suppose, what is moral? What is the correct thing to do? If you feel that you are a manipulator, or maybe as a Virgo you just take the view that the ends always justify the means. And that's it. I think Virgo, it is a transition day, and I think that the movement of the Sun from Gemini to Cancer over the next few days is going to be fortunate, but just there are a couple of people that I think you do have to watch out for. Libra. The Sun is changing sign. It's moving into Cancer. And from a Libran view, that is important. Cancer is a high-profile sign for you. It's about how you present yourself to the world. Often connected with things like status, how you appear, career, business, your public profile in general. And so with the Sun moving into Cancer, over the next month, your profile is going to be important to you, and you're going to want to present yourself and your ambitions in the best possible light. And I do think that you can be successful. So in that sense, it is your time of year. So think about what you want to achieve between now and, say, July the 22nd. There is a little bit of a hurry here. I suppose it depends where you are. You don't want to get caught up in the summer slowdown. When the Sun moves into Leo, I suppose certainly in the northern hemisphere when it's high summer, you might have perhaps missed your chance. So over the next 4 weeks, really consider, what actually you want to achieve. And there is a lot going on in the sign Cancer, because when the Sun moves into Cancer, you've also got Venus in Cancer and you've got Mercury in Cancer. And of course, Venus is your ruler. So I think this sense of what you're trying to achieve, this is something you've already been considering. And now that the Sun joins Venus in Cancer, it's becoming more pressing. So, I don't want to hurry you. I don't want to panic you. I'm just trying to encourage you to get going as fast as you can. Don't be in too much of a hurry. You don't want to make mistakes. In fact, today, with the moon in Sagittarius, you certainly don't want to make mistakes, because the beginning of the day, the moon is opposition Jupiter. Okay, it might depend on your time zone. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, you might feel this opposition between the moon and Jupiter quite strongly, and that moon opposition Jupiter might just encourage you to take things a bit too quickly and to be a little bit too hasty, and perhaps say things that you later regret. So moon opposition Jupiter, try to take it a little bit slowly to begin with. This is just the beginning of the Sun moving into Cancer. In fact, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, actually the Sun doesn't move into Cancer today. The solstice is actually tomorrow. But in general, Libra, it is a time when things are moving in your favour. And one aspect today that perhaps is worth taking note of is a trine aspect between the moon and the North Node. And that aspect between the moon and the North Node reminds you that you are not alone. So if you're trying to work out what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be doing it, then the moon trine the North Node perhaps encourages you to get some advice. Now, as a Libran, advice should be something that you're quite happy to take. Libra is a very sociable sign, and I think that with that moon trine the North Node, ask someone for some advice. Ask them, what do you think you should do? Listen to that advice. You don't have to take that advice seriously, but it's a good idea to work out what people have got to offer, because I just think right now there are people out there who actually have a great deal to offer. So to make sure that you're able to take advantage of it, though, you've got to be a little bit careful there, because I'm going to kind of contradict myself here, because on one hand I am suggesting it's a good thing to take advice, but on the other hand, I suppose I have to say, well, the sun is square Neptune. The Sun is very close to 0 degrees Cancer. As it makes that change from Gemini to Cancer, the Sun makes a square to Neptune, which is at 2954 Pisces. So there is that square to Neptune. And so while it is a very good idea to take advice today, it's about listening to the advice. It's not actually about committing yourself to one person's advice. And perhaps getting advice is a process. You listen to one person, you listen to another person, and then you make up your mind over a period of a few days. And I think that is probably the right approach. If you make up your mind today with Sun square Neptune, and particularly if you trust someone, you absolutely trust someone with everything you've got, then there can be trouble. But if you're more patient, you're ready to trust someone, but you're also aware that no one person has all the answers, that every person is capable of at best making mistakes, at worst being deceptive. If you're just aware of that, then I think that things should be fine. So yeah, it is an important day, I think. And I think that the solstice is important, whether it happens today or tomorrow, if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, or what's it? Asia, Australia, New Zealand. That's solstice should all be happening tomorrow. Oh, maybe not the Middle East, but okay, depends. But let's not get too hung up on time zones. And so just prepare yourself for the next month, and don't be in too much of a hurry, but at the same time realize that you haven't got all the time in the world, and just perhaps create targets for yourself that you want to achieve, say by around the 22nd of July in 4 weeks time. Scorpio. The solstice is in most cases a fortunate event for Scorpios, because when you have the summer solstice, winter solstice if you're in the southern hemisphere, when you have the solstice, the sun moves from Gemini into Cancer. And if you are a Scorpio, then the sun moving into Cancer is really quite fortunate, because Cancer is a water sign, and we've already got quite a lot of stuff happening in Cancer. We've got Mercury in Cancer, we've got Venus in Cancer, and now we have got the sun in Cancer. And the sign Cancer, from a Scorpio point of view, is about new horizons, things happening which are exciting, which can bring you out of your shell. So this is a good time for Scorpios. And it's not just about sort of conceptual, idealistic stuff. It can also be about who you are and what you want to achieve. With the sun, the sun moving from Gemini to Cancer. With the sun in Gemini, over the last few months, some some Scorpios have been feeling rather confused. It's like you've been out of your element. May have been actually longer than a month. All this stuff in Gemini has been rather confusing, and you haven't known really what to think, how to behave, and it just hasn't felt right. But fortunately, things are moving out of Gemini. We've already got Mercury and Venus out of Gemini, and the sun is now moving into Cancer. So you have a sense that you're more in your element. And you're in your element, but that doesn't mean to say that everything is being confirmed. It's the lazy side of Scorpio just wants their view of the world to be confirmed by external events. Well, that's not going to happen. You're going to be challenged, but challenged in a completely fortunate sense. You're being challenged to make the most of what you've got. You're being also challenged to broaden your horizons. That's what's going on as these planets move into Cancer. And if you are working, if you've got a career or something, if you've got a business, the challenge may be especially important. It may be that you've just got caught into some kind of routine, and you've got very defensive about this routine, and you just want things to just happen in a particular way, and you don't want any surprises. But with the Sun moving into Cancer, you're being pushed to make some changes because maybe you're not fully making the most of your potential. And I think that's going to start to become clear probably over the next few days. And now you've got to make some changes. Perhaps you've got to ask for more responsibilities. You've got to perhaps use your abilities in new ways in which you just hadn't used them before. And yeah, it could be tough at first, but Scorpio, you have to actually do what is right. And I think that it's not a time to be lazy. And I think in certain situations, Scorpio may need a change of scene because the current scene has become tired, has become boring, and it's not been making the most of your talents. And so a Sun change of sign now requires a change of scene. So I'm hoping that you are up to the challenge. Now, another thing happening today, which is more short term, is the fact that the Moon is moving through Sagittarius, and it's in the opposite sign to Gemini. So the opposite sign to Jupiter. So we've got Jupiter in Gemini, Moon in Sagittarius. And at the beginning of the day, especially in East Asia, New Zealand, Australia, we've got this Moon opposition Jupiter, though I think regardless of the time zone, I think we'll still be feeling this Moon opposition Jupiter. And this Moon-Jupiter opposition could encourage you to do something a little careless with money. I think that is possible because Moon-Jupiter opposition could be about an exaggeration, thinking you need to do something, so you spend money, or you feel that spending money is an answer, or you find that other people are spending money, or just something excessive about money. Could be about your excessive behavior, could be someone else's excessive behavior. You just need to make sure that it doesn't get out of control because it could do. Just be open to that possibility. So when you're dealing with money, ask yourself, are you being rational, or are you escalating things and perhaps spending too much? Okay, it could be about worrying too much. I suppose that is another possibility. So money is going to be important today, I think, but you need to get the right perspective. Sagittarius. The Moon is well and truly in Sagittarius. Doesn't matter where you are. The Moon is going to be in Sagittarius all day. And so with the Moon in Sagittarius, I think that you're going to be feeling quite optimistic and confident. You're going to feel that you are in the right place, that you've perhaps arrived. And that is good. But you need a little bit of discipline today, I think, because the Moon is making an opposition to Jupiter. Jupiter's your ruler, and with Moon opposition Jupiter, you could take things too far. I mean, Sagittarians can take things too far. I mean, Sagittarius is a mutable sign. Sagittarians do not like to be constrained. I mean, that's part of what it means to be a Sagittarius, not to be constrained. But you could exaggerate, or you could respond to something in an inappropriate way. Now, the thing about Sagittarius is that there is a certain contradiction to Sagittarius. On one hand, we think about Sagittarius and we think about freedom. doing what you like. No bounds to Sagittarius. But there is another aspect to Sagittarius, and that is Sagittarius is actually quite a moralistic sign because it's ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is a moralistic planet, and you should avoid being too judgmental today. If you see something you don't like, if you see someone behaving in a way you don't like, then don't immediately rush to judgment, unless, of course, they're doing something totally unreasonable. I don't know. You think of, your fellow Sagittarian Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, shooting puppies and shooting her puppy and killing her goat because it smells bad. Now that is an example of something which is clearly something you need to do something about. That's not the kind of behavior one goes and tolerates. But I'm thinking more about things that are more of a matter of opinion. So don't rush to judgment unless it really is appalling. Instead, allow the situation to clarify. And I think that when the situation has clarified, it will be, easier to make up your mind in a clear and coherent way. And also, we shouldn't forget that today the Sun is making a square to Neptune. And so, with the Sun square Neptune, it really is easy to make the wrong decisions, to jump to conclusions. I think particularly about other people. The Sun, just as it leaves Gemini, it is just in Gemini, ready to move to Cancer, but Gemini is your opposite sign. So something to do with one-to-one relationships or certain individuals, it just could be a little bit of confusion, possibility of making the wrong judgment. So do be aware of that, Sagittarius. But this shouldn't take away from the fact that the moon is in your sign, and that's a great place for the moon to be in. And the moon is making a trine to the North Node. North Node is in Aries, in a fire sign. It's in a sign which is really very creative, and I do think that you can find your creative spark today, and once you find it, you'll know it. You'll know this is what you're supposed to be doing, and your creative spark is what you need. Every Sagittarius needs to find that creative spark. Once you've got that creative spark, the past is forgotten. You feel more confident. You feel more powerful, and at the same time, you come over as being an energetic person, and everyone thinks you're great. So find that spark; it's available. Capricorn. Things are changing. I know that yesterday, when I talked about Capricorn, I was probably a little bit negative and downbeat. I was suggesting maybe that you were a little bit uncertain of yourself. Well, today things are changing because the Sun is changing sign from Gemini to Cancer. Okay, I understand that if you're an Australian Capricorn, the Sun won't actually move into Cancer until tomorrow, but I think you have to regard this just as an overall day of a sign change, even if it is about tomorrow. And I think the changeover suits you well. I think that you haven't been entirely happy with the Sun being in Gemini. It's been a little bit tedious. There have been things to do. Things perhaps that you hadn't wanted to do, but you had to do it anyway, and you perhaps felt that other people weren't being especially helpful. and that might have made you somewhat resentful. But anyway, Sun changing sign from Gemini into Cancer, I think is going to make you feel more comfortable. I think it's also going to make you feel healthier. I think that perhaps you're going to be less concerned about your well-being and what might be undermining your well-being, and I think you're going to have a better understanding of other people. After all, Cancer is your opposite sign. So with the Sun moving into Cancer, it joins Venus and Mercury, which are already in Cancer. And I think you'll start to understand who people are, what they want, why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And because you start to really understand them, you'll be able to respond to them in an effective way. And in the end, I think that you will actually be taken a lot more seriously, and that is certainly a good thing. At the same time, you do not have to make a serious effort to be seen and heard. If you want to have people around you today, yeah, it can happen. That's fine. But still, I think that many Capricorns will appreciate their own space, and they're going to want to be in control. The moon is in Sagittarius. Isn't in Capricorn yet. I mean, the moon will not be in when's the moon moving into Capricorn? Not for a day or two. So to an extent, you can bide your time. And with the moon in Sagittarius, it also makes a trine to the North Node. And I think with that moon trine North Node, I think you'll find that today there are certain things that you're able to stabilize. So perhaps there's been a couple of situations that were up in the air. You weren't quite sure where they were going. And with moon trine North Node, you can bring them down to earth. And I think that certain people are going to really appreciate your grounded approach. And I'm thinking in particular of members of your family and people who know you very well. And, that is the foundation of everything, isn't it, Capricorn? I suppose when you think about all the people there are different levels of importance. And I mean, I know this sounds obvious, but sometimes it can get a bit confused. One can sort of find one's putting acquaintances before members of one's family, paying a lot of attention to people who aren't really important and ignoring the people who really matter. That can happen to everyone. It's not just you, but I think it perhaps has been happening a little bit. But now I think you can get your priorities right and start focusing on the people that matter. And by paying attention to members of your family, even if they're members of your family you haven't seen for months or years, you can sort of reach out to them. And I think if you do connect with your family, it's definitely the right thing to do. And you'll know it's the right thing to do by their response to you. Aquarius. So from an Aquarian perspective, the Sun represents other people. The Sun is ruler of Leo. And of course, Leo is Aquarius's opposite sign. So in terms of relationships and other people, we do need to track we need to track the Sun. We need to see what it's doing. And the Sun is moving into Cancer, and obviously it stays in Cancer for a month. And this may have implications for Aquarians. I think you may find that certain people, at least on the surface, appear to be less interesting than usual. You're an Aquarius, you're an air sign. Getting intellectual stimulation may well be very important to you, and so you might regard other people as an important source of intellectual stimulation. Yet you may be disappointed, over the next few weeks by how other people are responding to you. And there's then the question of what you do about it. Now, it may just be that certain people who may be very important to you, have had to change their priorities. It's not their fault, it's not your fault, it's just something that's happened. They feel that something has to be taken seriously, perhaps. Something has to be dealt with, and maybe they haven't got enough time for you, or they may be concerned with stuff that you just find rather boring. And I think, Aquarius, you need to be patient and you need to be tolerant, and just to recognize what's going on and perhaps try to understand other people's concerns. These concerns are real. I'm not saying that they're super serious, but as they say, you've got to sort of come alongside them and sort of see what's bothering them, and perhaps see if you can help. I suppose if you can help someone sort something out, the sooner it's sorted out, perhaps the sooner someone is going to be more interesting and perhaps more interested in you. Though the moon at the same time is moving through Sagittarius. And that is a very different picture, and it may suggest that there are several groups of people. It's like maybe the people who are really important to you seem just a little bit tedious, but people that are less important to you, they may seem more exciting. So in a way, I'm giving you a similar message to what I was saying to Capricorn. But I'm sort of giving the message in a sort of a different way. And I think with the moon in Sagittarius, short term, it may feel that, you may feel that you want to just focus on people who are fun and interesting, and just put boring people to one side. But I think you might be getting your priorities a bit wrong there. Just because someone is really interesting and fun, it doesn't mean they're going to stay that way. You could actually soon get bored of them. So don't be too encouraged by another person's exciting behavior. They may not be able to keep it up. And instead, you should maybe focus on what matters and the people who matter. And yeah, it's really important that you are tolerant. Yeah, that really does matter. Now, another thing about the sun moving into Cancer is that there are now 3 planets in Cancer. The Sun in Cancer, Mercury in Cancer, Venus in Cancer. And with these planets in Cancer, it's probably a time to look after yourself. It may be that just recently you might have somewhat neglected your well-being, whether it's your physical well-being or your psychological well-being. Perhaps you were too focused on your own mind, and you've got this sort of mind-body split, haven't you? And I think with Aquarians, the air signs in general can have this mind-body split, but you could have been very focused on your mind and not really been focusing on your body. You could have been ignoring your body, and not giving it the attention it deserved. And I think that now you've got these planets in Cancer and less emphasis on Gemini, I do think that your body may be becoming more important, and perhaps you need to pay greater attention to your physical well-being. Now, I'm not trying to scare you or anything. This is not about medical advice. This video is for entertainment purposes only. But I'm just suggesting that you might want to resolve any mind-body split there might be, and looking after yourself on a physical and a psychological level might be a good thing to do. And you know what, Aquarius, I think you probably know what I'm talking about. I think you know what areas you've perhaps been neglecting, and so it should be a relatively straightforward matter for you to do what you need to do and to listen to what your body is telling you. Pisces, you continue to feel that there is pressure on you, that there are things that really need to be done, and that it just won't wait. And I think that is reasonable. I think that you understand that there are certain people who are relying on you, and that you have a certain inspiration to you, but it's a kind of a disciplined inspiration that people will look up to. And I think that you can make things happen, and I think you're helped by the fact that the moon is in Sagittarius. Moon in Sagittarius, it's a good place for the moon to be in. And remember, the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter, and Jupiter is also your ruler. And you can, I think, provide some leadership and also some common sense. I think you have a good sense of what is realistic and what is not realistic. And if anything is going to go wrong, I think that you'll have a good understanding of how it's going to go wrong and why it's going to go wrong. And I think you'll be good at explaining to people what they need to do to maybe avert disaster. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, averting disaster, but you can be an exciting but moderating force today. So don't hide your light under a bushel. Now, another thing going on today, perhaps it's the important thing, is the sun changing sign. The sun has been in Gemini for a long time, but now it's the solstice. And so we've got the sun moving into Cancer. And with the sun moving into Cancer, you now are in a position where you need to focus on what matters to you. It's not about trying to please the crowd or to please authority figures. You have to think about yourself, because you have been given certain unique abilities, attributes, and these abilities and attributes, they need to be exercised. That is absolutely expected of you. And with the sun moving into Cancer, over the next few weeks, indeed until the sun moves out of Cancer into Leo, it is a time for to show the world what you can do. But it's not about appreciation. That is not compulsory to be appreciated. It's not compulsory to get praise. It's nice if you're appreciated. It's nice if you get praise. But if you're not appreciated or praised, it shouldn't matter, because it's you that matters. And if you're doing what is right for you, then everything else should fit together. And so, I'm confident, with the sun moving into Cancer, that it is a time of renewal, but it's also a time when you perhaps need to deliver, and that pressure is not coming from the outside world. It's coming from you, and you need to, in a way, deliver on your promise, on your promise to yourself. And certainly, it's not a time to be just doing what other people want, not rocking the boat. No, it's not really about that. Though, don't feel that you have to take dramatic gestures, particularly today, because today we've got a square aspect between the Sun and Neptune. So remember, Neptune is moving through your sign. It's coming right at the end of your sign. It just feels as if Neptune is about to leave Pisces. Of course, Neptune doesn't leave Pisces until next year. It gets so close to leaving Pisces. Gets to 29 degrees 56 minutes, but then it goes retrograde, and so it's not until next year that the Neptune moves into Pisces, and then the Sun is making a square aspect to Neptune, and as I said, today, and this Sun square Neptune. It's not a time for, as I just said, it's not a time for you to be taking huge initiatives, to be, choosing which fork of the road you're going to go down, making big decisions, because I think there's a chance with that Sun square Neptune that you get it wrong. Rather, it's a time for perhaps understanding that you live in a complicated world, that the answers are never clear, and that you actually need time to work out what is going on. So don't fall into the trap of making a fast decision, because that Sun square Neptune is going to muddy the waters in a serious way. But I think all of this. You're a water sign. You understand what Neptune is all about. So go with the flow. Don't commit yourself. In many cases, Pisceans can get away with never committing themselves. And perhaps that's a good thing. Okay, I understand Saturn is in Pisces, so you are perhaps better able to commit yourself than usual. But anyway, I don't think today is a day for making commitments. Instead, just go with the flow. And that is it for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 44, coming to meet. Now, coming to meet is about having to deal with inferior elements that are perhaps trying to worm their way into our confidence. And the advice here is that we have to be very wary, because our independence may be threatened. And if we give away too much, indeed perhaps give away anything at all, we could be in trouble. And I do think that this kind of links with the fact that today there is a square aspect between the Sun and Neptune. So you could say that the Sun represents our identity, our selfhood. And Neptune represents all the things that are trying to undermine our selfhood. And so with coming to meet, we've got people around us who perhaps are not going to be useful. We might feel that we should trust them, but is that really a good idea? Remember also, we've got a heliocentric aspect between Mercury and Pluto. Remember I talked about manipulation with that. There may be people trying to manipulate us, trying to gain our confidence through clever words. And we have to be really careful here with this hexagram coming to meet. And we've got two moving lines here. Now, the bottom line moves. And the advice with the bottom line is that we've got to call a halt to things. We've got to put on the brakes. So it's like we are in the process of meeting people, trusting people, and we have to call a halt. We just have to stop, realize that there is a danger here, and that if we were to go further, we would be dragged down and we would lose our independence. So real caution is required there. And I think that there is this warning that if we don't put the brakes on, someone might come into our life and we will be encouraging them and they might seem harmless, and then they would end up being a complete menace. So that's the first movement there. And the second line moves, and the advice with the second line moving, it's kind of similar. It's telling us not to rely on other people. If we've got any scope for independent action and for being self-sufficient, we should not rely on people. We use all our own resources rather than rely on another person. Okay, there might come a point where we've gone through all our resources, where we've got nothing. Now, okay, in that case, then we may have to start bringing people into our life. But while we've got something, while we've got scope for independence, we really must not rely on others. We must be as independent as we can for as long as possible. Now, I do understand that this hexagram is just for the day. I asked, what is Thursday going to be like? I'm not talking about the next 10 years. So I suppose we need to kind of scale the whole thing down. What are you engaged in today? Really consider your whole social environment, your family, your friends. Consider strangers. Who's trying to get in touch with you? Who's trying to persuade you to do things? Where are all the social pressures coming in? And they might be really trivial. So you have to consider how it fits with your day. And, general messages, just be as independent as possible, because, there are temptations to give too much away. Now, this hexagram does change. And it's quite a contradictory change, because this hexagram switches to hexagram 13, which is fellowship with men. I think we've had this quite recently. I don't think we should see fellowship with men in terms of gender. I think fellowship with other people is probably a better way of describing it. So it's okay to have people around us, but we have to go through the process of the previous hexagram coming to meet first. We have to be independent and be self-sufficient and make sure we're not reliant on others. Make sure that we're dealing with people who are not going to take liberties. So we have to be very secure in ourself before we are ready to have this fellowship with other people, to be able to enjoy other people's company, to make use of other people's company, to benefit from other people's company. But all the time, it's just important to make sure that our boundaries are properly looked after and that we're not giving anything away. So overall, this hexagram is talking a lot about how these, not just this hexagram, but the previous hexagram, this I Ching reading, is talking a lot about how we deal with other people. And I just think it's just really important that effective contact with other people depends on us having total respect for our own independence. Okay, having done the I Ching, I'm going to look at the astrology, and in particular, I'm going to look at the square between the Sun and Neptune. And of course, today we have got a square between the Sun and Neptune, and we can clearly see the Sun and Neptune square in this chart. You know, there's the Sun at 29 Gemini and there's Neptune at 29 Pisces. And I think that this Sun square Neptune has sort of greatly influenced really everything I've said so far. And I think that it also seems to tie in with what I was saying in terms of the I Ching reading. So what does it mean to mean if one has got Sun square Neptune? I think, in a general sense, a chart with Sun square Neptune can be nebulous. It can be about someone who is perhaps uncertain about who they are, but also about someone who can be quite deceptive. So it might be about someone who is difficult to read. You know, one's not quite sure what this person is up to. Further, I think we have to bear in mind that the Sun is a masculine planet, and it may work differently in male and female charts. So in male charts, the Sun square Neptune, the Sun is more likely to be the person, the male chart, the man. That is his Sun. That's who he is, and it is square Neptune. So that could be about literally a man who is deceptive, a man who is unsure of himself. That is a negative way of looking at it. Sun square Neptune can be about art, it can be about imagination, and so someone who is very artistic, who's got a powerful imagination, that would fit Sun square Neptune. Someone who is very spiritual, or at least someone who regards spirituality as being important, Sun square Neptune. Of course, it could be about a fake and a charlatan. Fortunately, I haven't got Sun square Neptune in my chart, but have I? No. I have not got Sun square Neptune in my chart. I've got Sun square Pluto. So yeah, Sun square Neptune could be a fake and a charlatan. It may say something in certain cases about one's health. So in terms of medical astrology, the Sun can be the heart. So if you've got Sun square Neptune, it may indicate an issue with the heart at some stage. That might be a weakness there. I mean, I don't want to worry you. If you've got Sun square Neptune, that doesn't mean you've got heart issues. I'm just saying that might be, in certain situations, a way in which Sun square Neptune could work. You know, because the Sun is also about vitality. So Sun square Neptune can be about sort of weakness there. Now, in a female chart, you might say that the Sun square Neptune is perhaps not so much of a problem because the Sun is going to potentially be projected. So a woman with Sun square Neptune might be attracted to men who are quite Neptunian. She might be vulnerable to deception. She might be attracted to men who just lie to her. Perhaps they could be unfaithful to her, could deceive her, try and take her money, for example. Again, I'm not trying to make any of you paranoid if you're female and you've got Sun square Neptune. I'm just looking at some possible manifestations of it, and I am looking at this Sun square Neptune in a theoretical sense, in a sort of a rational sense. I mean, by rational, using William James's meaning of rational, one's trying to logically work out what Sun Neptune is about without really considering any empirical evidence, because William James would always make that distinction between the rational and the empirical. So rational, William James used the word rational not perhaps in the way we would use it now. It's about using one's intelligence and intellect to work out what something means rather than observation. And observation is what I want to do now. I want to look at some charts which do have Sun square Neptune in them. So I'm going to start by looking at people who have got Sun square Neptune. Some of these people you may have heard of, other people maybe not. Just remember, these people and these events, they reflect my interests and my prejudices. This is not just a random sample. This perhaps, perhaps reflects my rather distorted view of the world, so apologies for that. So let's start off with someone who's quite famous, or should we say notorious, in Britain, and that is Albert Pierrepoint. So Albert Pierrepoint was a celebrity executioner. He was a hangman in Britain during the 20th century. He hanged a lot of the Second World War criminals. There was a film about Albert Pierrepoint, and he was an Aries, and his sun in Aries was square Neptune. In fact, Albert Pierrepoint had a Uranus-Neptune opposition, and Sun was square Uranus, Sun was square Neptune, and he also had a Mars-Saturn square. So what better aspect for an executioner to have than Mars square Saturn? Now, I don't know if you've seen the film on Pierrepoint. I mean, it's worth watching, but it's sort of, the film about Pierrepoint was very much a sort of anti-death penalty film. But the thing about Pierrepoint is that he prided himself. He was very proud of his speed, that he could execute people really quickly. He would go into the cell and they wouldn't know what was going on, and he would just sort of say, stand up, go this, do that, and they're dead, and that's it. And those who are sort of perhaps nostalgic about the death penalty in the UK, would say, well, this is how it should be done. It was all painless. People, they didn't strangulate, they weren't decapitated. He did it properly. And I suppose you could say Sun in Aries, this was someone who did it quickly. And he had the Sun square Neptune, and Uranus opposition Neptune, you could also say was, well, Uranus opposition Neptune. Ebertin writes that Uranus Neptune, as I keep reminding you, Uranus Neptune, according to Ebertin, is elimination of a waking consciousness. And so I suppose you could say, if you're in the business of hanging people, that is that is what you're doing. And so I think his chart fits quite well. So what I wanted to do with Pierrepoint's chart is look at what was happening with his last major execution. I don't know if it was, I don't think it was his last major execution, but it was an execution that there is a view that it was very traumatic, and that was the execution of Ruth Ellis in 1955. So Ruth Ellis was a woman who had this terrible relationship with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend completely mistreated her, and you can look it up, but he was horrible to her, and in the end she snapped and she shot him and outside a pub in Hampstead, which Hampstead is a part of North London, and she admitted it, and she was completely honest about it. And those are the days when there was no sort of hanging around for decades on death row. I think she was hanged 3 months after she committed the crime. But it was a very controversial case because the British public felt sorry for her. They understood she'd been mistreated. And I think after her hanging, I think the British public didn't see the death penalty in quite the same way. And perhaps there's a theory that it had some impact on him. I mean, I think soon after he stopped working as the main executioner, although I think it was supposed to be some argument about money. But I thought it'd be just interesting to see what was going on at the time of the hanging of Ruth Ellis. So here is the chart for the hanging of Ruth Ellis's execution. And of course it was made extra sort of poignant by the fact that it was a woman being hanged. So here's the chart for her hanging. And remember that Pierrepoint had Sun square Neptune in his chart, and he also had Uranus-Neptune opposition. So it could be that he was sensitive to those two cycles. He was sensitive to the Uranus-Neptune cycle, and he was sensitive to the Sun-Neptune cycle. So at the time of the hanging of Ruth Ellis on July the 13th, 1955, I think it was about 9 a.m. in London in Holloway Prison, the Sun was making an application to the square of Neptune, and also Uranus was, you see, there was a Sun conjunct, you see the Sun conjunct Uranus square Neptune. So let's just put those two charts side by side so you can kind of get what I mean. So here is Pierrepoint's chart. There's his Sun square Neptune, Uranus-Neptune opposition, with the Sun on the T. And so when he hanged Ruth Ellis, we used to have Uranus-Neptune square, very close, with Sun involved in that square. So it seems to be here with the case of Albert Pierrepoint that the Sun-Neptune and the Sun-Neptune and how it was connected with Uranus as well, how it is kind of repeated when he hanged Ruth Ellis. And I think there was a view that this execution was traumatic not just for him, but for the public. And I think the public, did start to really question the death penalty as a result of Ruth Ellis's execution. So turning to someone else, Barack Obama. Barack Obama has Sun square Neptune. And so there is his Sun in Leo, but it's square Neptune. Now, the trouble about this Sun square Neptune is that, of course, it very much feeds into a lot of people's suspicions about Barack Obama. I was listening to a YouTube channel, by fairly respected commenters who are talking about who is running America. And there is a theory that it is Barack Obama running America, that in fact this is Barack Obama's third term. He's this sort of secret president. There are people, serious people who believe that he's still running the show. And so you could say that would fit his Sun square Neptune. By the way, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just pointing it out that there is a view. So Sun square Neptune, there is something a bit shadowy here. We're not perhaps seeing the whole truth about Obama. And of course, this Sun square Neptune in his chart very much feeds into his critics. It sort of supports a certain narrative that there is something deceptive about it, but there are certain things that are hidden in Barack Obama's chart, life, and that is reflected by his chart. Now, I'm not going to speculate anymore. I'll just leave you with that chart, and you can tell me what you think within reason. So that is Barack Obama. Another person, I'm kind of interested in, the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. I mean, I suppose it was the fact that I was living in Bratislava and was interested in that part of the world, but I'm sort of really fascinated by the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. Remember, Heydrich was this SS leader who was, responsible for the Czech lands, and he was a monster, and he ruled the Czech lands from Prague with an iron fist, and then he was assassinated in 1942. And one of his assassins has had Sun square Neptune. So here is his Gabčík was a Slovak assassin, and he has there's his Sun square Neptune, and you could say that the Sun square Neptune was manifesting in how he assassinated Heydrich, or what went wrong, or what appeared to go wrong in the assassination. So if you've got Sun in Aries, this is, you want to take action. I think when he went on this mission, he was warned that it's very unlikely that he'd come back, but it was almost a death sentence, this mission to be sent to assassinate Heydrich. But Sun in Aries, let's go do it. But Neptune, sort of something frustrates it and something gets in the way. So, what happened, was when this man, Gabčík, he stood in the road, Heydrich's car coming along, and he tries to fire his machine gun at Heydrich, but the gun jams, and it was left to the other assassin, Kubiš, to throw a bomb at Heydrich, and it was a bomb that killed him. So that's Sun square Neptune, and that might be one manifestation of Sun square Neptune. Sun square Neptune might also say something about his death. He died in the vault of a church I think it was the church of Cyril and Methodius in Prague, and he was sort of trapped, and he was surrounded by the SS, and they were flooded. I think they were actually pumping water in to kind of get them out, and I think in the end he committed suicide. And remember, people are sensitive to particular cycles, and if you're born on a Sun square Neptune, then you may well be sensitive to the Sun-Neptune cycle. And so when he, I don't know what time exactly it happened. I tried to look, but I couldn't find it. But so at the time of his death, suicide, he was in a totally hopeless position. The Sun was at 26 Gemini, and Neptune was at 27 Virgo. So there was a Sun-Neptune square when he committed suicide. And I mean, if he hadn't committed suicide, he would have been executed and tortured or whatever anyway. So he felt that was the right thing for him to do. And so he was sensitive to the Sun-Neptune cycle. So he was born on a Sun-Neptune square, and he died on a Sun-Neptune square. And of course, the concept of the water, I think, if that's true, I think they were flooding the place. That really does fit. So he committed suicide, or was surrounded by the SS and killed himself on June the 18th, 1942. So what else was happening on June the 18th, 1942? Well, what else was happening on June the 18th, 1942 was happening in Liverpool. And on that same day, June the 18th, 1942, Paul McCartney was born. And so this is Paul McCartney's chart. Same day as Kubish and Gabčík's deaths. And so there is Paul McCartney, Sun-Neptune square, the same Sun-Neptune square. I think this is an accurate time of birth. So Paul McCartney has Neptune on the ascendant and Sun on the midheaven. And so this chart surely illustrates the creativity of Sun square Neptune. It can be creative, and it is angular. You can imagine how this chart could have gone wrong. You could have imagined if you'd said that this was a chart of someone who had a life of fantasy, a life of deception, someone who was completely ungrounded. But no, in this case, Paul McCartney, maybe through luck and ability, arrived in the right place at the right time. And so he was able to use that Sun-Neptune in a purely creative way, in terms of, and also perhaps being in touch with music. I mean, isn't there that theory? I think there was, I think his name was Taverner. He was a composer. He had a theory that music is not actually created from scratch. All the music was existed from the beginning of a universe or from the beginning of a world, and so it just had to be discovered. And I suppose if that is true, then you could imagine Paul McCartney at Sun square Neptune maybe got him in touch with something, in touch with the cosmos, and so perhaps was able to rediscover this music that had been existed from the very beginning. I mean, I suppose, it's always kind of incredible that these people were creating the music they did when they were so young. I mean, these people were really young. I mean, in their early 20s, it's and maybe Sun square Neptune allows them to just get in touch with it. And I think that Sun square Neptune, the fact that it's angular, does make it so much more powerful. As far as other people with Sun square Neptune, someone I've looked at fairly recently is Jesse Livermore. This may be another way in which Sun square Neptune perhaps can have a fortunate manifestation. So remember, Jesse Livermore was probably the most successful private investor or speculator of the 20th century. He kept making fortunes, and he lost making and losing fortunes. He loses fortune, and absolutely from scratch he'd make his fortunes again. And he'd just keep doing it until finally he lost his fortune, and the rules had changed, and in the end he couldn't get it back, and he committed suicide. But it may be that for a speculator, it might be useful to have Sun square Neptune, because he had the Sun at 3 Leo, strong self-belief, and there is his square Neptune. I don't have his time of birth, so Neptune is not in the second house. I don't know what time he was born. But so Sun square Neptune could be about speculation, but it's also perhaps about the process by which someone makes a lot of money, but then loses touch with what was going on. And notice he's got no personal planets in Earth signs. He's got Chiron, Neptune. So yeah, so here is a chart. No personal planets in Earth signs, so no Earth to speak of. I don't count Neptune and Pluto as being really in Earth signs because, obviously they are in Earth signs, but I don't regard them as providing someone with Earth, because they're generational planets. So no Earth, Sun square Neptune. You can see he's good at making money, but he doesn't have any feel for it. So he makes money and he loses money, makes money, loses money. Okay, the Sun square Neptune may make him so ungrounded, but he's able to take incredible risks that other people couldn't make. And then because of these risks, he may be quite sensitive. He can read as they used to say, he can read the tape. And so he was able to make a lot of money, but in the process he was taking risks, and through the laws of probability, his risks in the end had to go wrong. But so I think that is certainly a manifestation of Sun square Neptune. The Sun square Neptune can have really unpleasant aspects or sides to it. Here is the horoscope of Kajetan Karol Poznanski. He is a Polish murderer who born October the 6th, 1989, and he went for an Italian lesson in Poland, and then he decapitated the Italian teacher. Then he fled, and he had this. I think he was arrested in Malta in the end, and in the end he was extradited back to Poland. And there is his. I don't have a time of birth, but there is his sun. There's his sun at 13 Libra, and his Neptune at 9 at. Well, in fact, you can see he's got Jupiter opposition Neptune. He's got Sun on the T. I mean, he was apparently very intelligent. I think he wrote stories and he wrote articles about cannibalism and stuff like that. So he's just had this fascination for murder, and he had some philosophical theory about why he had to kill someone. He wasn't stupid, but his ideas made him drove him to do this. So it's all kind of weird. And there's Jupiter opposition Neptune. Jupiter can be about ideas. Jupiter in Cancer, about a philosophy, and it's opposition Neptune. It's a crazy philosophy, and it's square Sun. And so that, in his case, was how Sun square Neptune might have been influencing him in terms of his behavior. Then there is RFK. People have said that his time of birth is available. Robert Kennedy's chart is available. Now, if you go to astro.com and you look, you will see a time of birth. But the thing is, Astro.com gives it a C rating, and I don't think that's good enough. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I want to go for A rating, double A rating, a B rating, but a C just means there is some doubt about it. It's like someone says that he was born on this time, but we don't know for sure. The reason I don't use that time is because I could use this time, and I could go on and on and on about with this time, and I could have elaborate calculations, and then one sunny day someone could come up with a real time, and it could be miles away from the time I was using, and I would just completely embarrass myself, and I just don't want to take that risk. So I'm just taking the noon chart. And Robert F. Kennedy has a fairly close Sun square Neptune square. I mean, you could say, in terms of projection, the Sun is the father. And of course, his father was murdered in 1968. And so Bobby Kennedy, murdered in 1968, Sun square Neptune. So that could be, you could say that is some search for the father. That father figure is just not there, was taken away. I don't know how old would he have been when he was, he was relatively old. It wasn't like an early childhood thing. He was 14. But still, you can you can see perhaps the trauma there, and I understand that in later life, of course, he had issues with drug abuse, and again, so that would fit with Sun square Neptune. And I think those are all the people I wanted to look at. So I just now wanted to look at a few events which have Sun square Neptune. So you could say that it is a Sun square Neptune can be about disasters. This is a chart of a mining disaster in New Zealand, and it was the Pike River. I think a lot of people were killed in it, and it was quite recent, 2010. I think November the 19th, 2010. There was a serious mining disaster in, I think I've gone for Greymouth, New Zealand, and at the time of the disaster, Sun is at 26 Scorpio, Neptune is at 25 Aquarius. So there we have Sun Neptune square. I think I've got the right time for this. You can see that Uranus is on the ascendant. That's very common to see Uranus angular when you have an earthquake or a mining disaster or something like that. And yes, Sun is square Neptune. It's not, neither planet is angular, but it just adds to the whole thing. So Sun square Neptune, I suppose you could say that, I suppose with Sun in Scorpio, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know anything about this mining disaster, but I'm just pointing it out. But Sun square Neptune, things are unstable. I mean, that's what Neptune does. I don't know if water is involved in it in terms of destabilizing the structure of the mine. So yeah, that's how the Sun Neptune may have been working in the case of this disaster. So another disaster which happened last year with Sun square Neptune was that submarine, the Oceangate disaster. This is when you had this guy, what was his name, Stockton Rush. He had this company, Oceangate, and he had this submarine which was made of carbon fiber. Basically, the experts were saying that you can't make a submarine out of carbon fiber. It's just not stable to send it down, 4,000 meters underwater. And of course, in the end, it imploded. And this is roughly the chart of the accident. I mean, I don't know about the precise time, but for some reason I've got this time. And you can see that Sun is really close to the square of Neptune at the time of the implosion. Sun at 27.8 Gemini, Neptune 27.39 Pisces. So Sun square Neptune, a submarine disaster. According to this time, it is angular. If it was, maybe it really was Sun on the midheaven square Neptune. And actually, it happened just after a new moon. So that new moon would have been at around 26 Gemini. And so new moon, square Neptune. I mean, obviously, they weren't consulting an astrologer when putting this submarine down into the depths of the Atlantic. I mean, that's just classic astrology. Remember, I was talking about Sun square Neptune and concerns about water damage, and this illustrates the point, I would have said, perfectly. Neptune can also be about drugs, and one drug which is used recreationally as well as medically is ketamine. And I believe that on August the 3rd, 1964, was the first time that ketamine was used On humans. I believe it was used on prisoners. And so, if you look at the chart for this, Sun in Leo, square applying to a square of Neptune. Remember, I don't have a time for when this experiment happened. So the advent of a new drug can be connected with Neptune. Remember when I was talking about Albert Hofmann, the first time he deliberately took LSD, Neptune was at around 29 something Virgo, so Neptune was exactly opposition the Aries point. This is, okay, Neptune is not exactly square the Sun, but the idea of Sun square Neptune being connected with drugs, but perhaps connected with a new drug, that would make sense. And also with Neptune right now, close to the Aries point, it would not surprise me if right now, as we speak, someone is experimenting with a new psychoactive drug as we talk. Maybe it's a drug that's being developed right now, but in maybe 20 years' time, everyone is going to be using it, for better or for worse. So it'd be interesting to see what new drugs are going to appear over the next few years and when they were developed. Were they developed right now when Neptune is so close to the Aries point? Of course, next year Neptune will also be close to the Aries point. And I'm kind of running out of time here. Okay, I should say something about Ireland. Because I think Ireland does have a spot of bother. And here's a chart for the Easter rising. So this was Easter Sunday, 1916. I've looked at this chart quite recently. So it could be argued that the chart of the Easter rising was the chart of Ireland, that Ireland came into being at this time. Now, I know it didn't come into being because for a few years afterwards, Ireland was continued to be ruled, Southern Ireland continued to be ruled by the British. But I think for many Irish people, this is like the beginning of an independent Ireland, because from then on, the British completely mishandled putting down this revolt. They were just heavy-handed. They allowed the army to, as far as I can see, just almost arbitrarily execute people. The army were in control. It was done all wrong. Maybe if the British had handled it in a different way, they could have postponed independence. But I think this is the beginning. And we can see that at the time of the Easter rising, the Sun was square Neptune. It's dissociate, so the Sun is at 3 degrees Taurus. It makes absolute sense for the Sun to be in Taurus because remember, Ireland is ruled by Taurus traditionally. It's the Emerald Isle, green. Sun is square Neptune. So with that Sun square Neptune, there is, well, a certain sense of fantasy there, a certain sense of hope. In this case, the fantasy short term was dashed, but I suppose in terms of the longer term, it worked out. Ireland got its independence at the time it did, largely as a result of the Easter rising. But it does mean that to an extent, the Sun square Neptune is locked into the Irish experience about what Ireland is about. I don't really know much about Ireland, so I'm not going to really speculate on how that might work out. Could you say that that's, I don't know. I know, of course, the Catholic Church. Can you really relate the Catholic Church to Sun square Neptune and the fact, and look at how the power of the Catholic Church was completely dashed, over the last few decades when it came out, all of the child abuse and so forth. That could be part of Sun square Neptune, but I don't know. I don't really know enough about Ireland. I've never been to Ireland. But the reason this Sun square Neptune is important, perhaps, is what's going on like right now. So if we look at the chart for the solstice, the precise moment that the sun goes into Cancer, and we set that chart for Dublin, okay, we have Sun square Neptune. So it may be that Ireland is sensitive to the Sun Neptune cycle. We've got Sun square Neptune at the time of the solstice, and that Sun set for Dublin. If we set the solstice for Dublin, the Sun is exactly on the descendant. And so Neptune is squaring the descendant, Ireland's descendant. Additionally, we've got Mars on the IC here. So given all that, I would have said, as I've said before, I think this solstice could be really difficult for Ireland because it does link into the Sun square Neptune that was around at the Easter Rising well over 100 years ago. So that might be how Sun Neptune is working. And I mean, I know that things are not easy in Ireland. I know that there's sort of an immigration crisis. There's, I don't know about the economy, but it doesn't seem to be a country that's at ease with itself. I mean, what country is at ease with itself? I mean, Britain is hardly at ease with itself. So I'm not singling out Ireland, but it does seem that right now, with the summer, I think it's going to be a long, hot summer for a lot of countries, but I think that would include Ireland. And I think that Sun square Neptune does have to be watched. And finally, chart of Marilyn Monroe's death. With Marilyn Monroe, there have been whole books, I think, written about who killed her, whether she was murdered, whether it was suicide, whether it was an accident. Maybe she, I think she died from a barbiturates overdose, but quite how those barbiturates got into her body is just, there's so much controversy about it. There is a simple theory that she was a Gemini. Geminis often suffer from insomnia, and she couldn't get to sleep, and maybe she just kept taking them and wanting to get to sleep, and it was just a simple overdose. But there are all sorts of other stories, and Kennedy's, and you name it. But as far as the chart of her death, which I think I've gone for 9:30 August the 4th, I mean, maybe that's not exactly right. But there's so much that is confusing about her death, so maybe it's not surprising that at the time of her death, Sun was square Neptune. Jupiter was also trine Neptune, but there is a Sun square Neptune at the time of her death. So the confusion there, plus the fact, of course, she died from a drug overdose. And I know that people die from drug overdoses all the time, but it was Marilyn Monroe. She was a person of collective importance, and so her death was perhaps more significant than other people's deaths. I shouldn't say that, but in a way it was big news. And so Sun square Neptune, this iconic figure, dies of a drug overdose in rather mysterious circumstances. So yeah, that fits Sun square Neptune. So that's all I'm going to say on the subject of Sun square Neptune. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you enjoyed the video and you are not subscribed, I would of course be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.